Never played by the rules. You're not supposed to do what I did during, you know, I left for 15 years, for one thing.
Why'd you do that?
Because I wanted a marriage to work.
With Ted?
Yeah.
Ted Turner, our mentor and originator of CNN.
Yes, yeah. I know. It's coming like coming home when I come here in this building.
Yeah. And so you left your career for marriage.
Yeah. 10
What,
years with him, and then 5 years writing my memoirs, and now I'm coming back to filmmaking, and you know, you're not supposed to do that when you're that age.
Yeah, because they don't allow it. Not that you can't do whatever you want. You're a great actress.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I mean, you decided that if you wanted to have a great marriage, you couldn't really have the career at that time?
Well, I thought maybe the problem had been, I'd been married twice before, that I was traveling too much, and, you know, you make movies with gorgeous guys, and maybe that was part of the problem. Well, no, I was always a good girl, but...
You were?
But, you know, you're away, but you're away.
Yeah.
So I wasn't the problem.
Were you a good girl on Clute?
No.
Because Donald Sutherland, that was a hot movie.
It was a hot relationship.
Was it between reality?
Yeah.
I knew that.
Not too often. It didn't happen too often.
But with him, huh?
Weird, huh?
I just thought he was very hot, very sexy. I remember that movie. It was scary, but it was sexy.
Yeah.
So this book that you've written, why did you write this book now? What was the reason?
Well, I started to come to the end of my 60s into my 70s, and I realized that I'm getting happier.
You're getting happier.
And it's not what I expected at all.
Yeah.
And I realized that when you're inside oldness, as opposed to looking at it from the outside, it's totally different. And I thought, well, am I unique? And if I'm not, why is nobody talking about it? You know, we have this view, the old view of age. You're born, you peak at midlife, and then you decline.
That's true.
Into pathology and decrepitude, and that's not what I've experienced.
The old decrepitude, yeah.
But it's not only not true of me, but it's not true of any of the older people that I know. So I decided I was going to spend a few years researching it, and I did a lot of research. I talked to doctors and scientists and all kinds of people, and so I wrote about it.
And so what are the top things that you found?
Oh, wow.
Because I think you're right. I agree with you. If you're healthy. If you're not healthy, it's not good to be old.
Oh, but listen, I have met so many people who aren't healthy, and yet they don't feel like ill people.
Really?
You know, sometimes illness can cause you to see things in a new way. You think you're being broken, when in fact you're being broken open.
Yeah.
You know, I did a play called 33 Variations. I did it.
I saw you.
I did it here, and I did it in Los Angeles, and I was a character that was dying of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and the great physicist Stephen Hawking came. You know, he came up with the Big Bang Theory. He's at Caltech for a month, and he came to see the play. Now, he has had ALS for 50 years. The only thing he can move is the tiny little muscle in the corner of his eye.
And yet he managed to get married a few times.
He's been married a few times. He has a twinkle in his eye.
He does.
I asked him, you know, since my character had the same disease as he did, I said, how do you think I did? And it took a long time for him to kind of spell out the words, but what he ended up saying was, you were my heartthrob.
Oh.
It's not exactly what I expected. And I said, Barbarella? And he said, yes. It's clear that, you know, as far as this man is concerned, he's living a full life. And I found this to be true a lot.
That's interesting. Well, of course, he has the brain. He has this. I didn't realize that he came up with the Big Bang Theory.
Now he's writing a book about the origin of the universe. You know, this man who can't move except for the corner of his eye.
Incredibly brilliant.
So one of the things that I discovered is it's not really so much if you're well or not, or you know, you can't move or you can move. It's your attitude about it. You know, as a great philosopher, Viktor Frankl said, everything can be taken from you in life except one thing. Your freedom to choose how you will respond to it, to the situations in your life. And so the people who do the best in the latter part of their life are people who choose to forgive, to interpret the events and people in their lives in a different kind of light. You know, you become, as you get older, you tend to see things, you see the commonalities more than the differences. You tend to be forgiving. You tend to be less tense, less stressed, less tussle, and there's a great study that was done of 360,000 Americans that showed that the majority of people over 50 are happier.
Yes. Well, that whole, that whole saw that life begins at 40, I think is probably true, too. People do start to have a different perspective on life at around 40 years old. Because you say, okay, this is it. I'm in the second half now. This is your third act, as you call it in this
Well, the
book.
first 30 years, the second 30 years, the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
30 to 60 and 60 to 90.
My third act began at 60. Mm-hmm. And when I was 59, I sort of realized, man, in a year, it's going to begin, and it's going to be my last act. And, last acts are important, right?
Well, they're very important.
They can make sense out of the first two. So I thought, well, what am I supposed to do with these last 30 years if I'm lucky enough to live that long? Mm-hmm. So I went back and I researched myself.
You did a review.
I did what I later found out is called a life review, and doctors recommend doing it, going back and trying to understand who you were, who your parents were, why they were the way they were, who your grandparents were.
Right.
And that's what I did, and it helped me understand that, what went on had nothing to do with me. It was their issues.
Right.
And I began to understand who I am, independent of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very good idea, I think, every decade even, to review the decade and say, well, this is where I used to be. I mean, that famous line, title from a book from a feminist, I forget her name, The Girl I Left Behind, is so true. It's like you look back and you say, who was that girl?
Usually the girl was pretty good. The problem for us women, it starts at about puberty. And the trick to getting old, if you age, the way I think people can, as a woman, you circle back to the girl you were. And you know that girl for the first time.
Well, you know what I always say, Jane, that when you're 10 years old, you pretty much know who you are, what you want in life. If you can get back to that. I mean, when I was 10 years old, I was imitating Jerry Lewis, and I was doing exactly what I do in my third act, as you call it.
Right.
And I think that people should look at themselves at 10 years old.
Yeah.
What were you at 10?
Cognitively, we may not know who we were. At 10, I was like, oh, yeah? Show me. Why should I do that? I climbed trees, I wrestled, I was feisty. And then as I approached puberty and adolescence, it was, what can I do for you? Oh, I want to please you. Oh, if you really see who I am, you won't love me. I have to be perfect, that kind of thing.
And where did
it took
that
me a
come
long time to get over. Well, it's true of a lot of women.
The pleasing factor.
Yes, we give up mastery to become pleasers. And then the goal is to get back to what we were before. Mm-hmm. Well, I was raised to believe, it's not that my father said to me, I won't love you unless you're perfect, but that was the behavior. I realized that
the vibe.
The vibe was if I didn't look right or if I didn't act right, that, I would never be loved. And so
Only from your father, not your mother?
I don't know, she was bipolar and she killed herself when I was 12. So, I didn't have anything from her.
Yeah. How about before you were 12?
Bipolarity tends, you don't really know who your parent is. It's hard to know.
Yeah. That's hard to live with mental illness when you're a child.
It's extremely hard. And it's one of the things, about a third of how well we age is genetic, and we can't do anything about it.
Just a third? I thought it was even more.
No, a third. And the good news is that means 2/3 depends on us and the choices that we make in life. Now, you can, depending on if you exercise, if you stay healthy, if you eat properly, if you work at having a positive attitude, you can mitigate against some of the genetic issues. I mean, I had depression, smoking, drinking too much.
Yeah.
I had depression coming from both sides, and 40s, my life didn't begin at 40. I thought my life was going to end at 40. 40 can be the ends of, as you begin to approach menopause, can be very, very hard for a lot of women.
Well, I got a divorce, so my life began. We'll be right back with more from Jane Fonda.
So did I, but it didn't work that way for me. No.
It'd be so long. I didn't know we were mad at that. We just didn't like each other.
That was a very moving scene between Jane Fonda and her father, Henry Fonda, from On Golden Pond. And Jane is back with me now. That really touches you, that scene, doesn't it, when you say it? It's upsetting still,
But how lucky am I to have done a movie like that with my father in roles that so paralleled real life.
Yeah.
I produced it, and I just feel so grateful that I was able to say that to him. I could never say it in real life, but it was hard for me to play that scene.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, your relationship with him, which we've read a lot about it at this point, and that he seemed to be a rather remote
Yes.
detached kind of personality. And, you know, it's ironic because his screen image is the warmest and the most toasty guy, you know, but you never know with actors what they're really like.
He always said acting provided him a mask, that he could show things because he was behind a mask that he couldn't reveal in real life.
Yeah. And you were saying that your mother committed suicide when you were 12 years old. Did they discuss it with you? Did he talk to you about it?
No, I was told she had a heart attack, and it wasn't until a year later in study hall that a supposed friend passed me a movie magazine that said how she killed herself.
Really? Mm. So you were still a kid. You were only 13 at that point, and so that's scary for you. And thinking, my God, my mother must have been really unhappy or something. And
well, you think it's your fault,
and you
right?
think it's your fault.
But this is where the life review comes in. You know, when I was writing my memoirs, I was able to obtain her medical records, and they were thick. And in the middle of them, in small, single, you know, spaced typewriting, because she knew how to type, she was a secretary, and little handwritten notes was her autobiography. They must have asked her to write about her life when she was admitted to the institution where she killed herself. And in it, what did I find? That she'd been sexually abused as a girl. And, you know, I had become an expert on sexual abuse and its effect on children. And, I mean, I work with adolescents in Georgia. That's my nonprofits are focusing on. So many of the girls and boys, but especially the girls, had been sexually abused. And I knew more about it than most lay people. And so the minute I read that, everything became clear. And I could totally forgive her and understand. I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was, but I was also able to forgive myself. That's the value of a life review. You realize it really had nothing to do with you. And you can begin to become who you're supposed to be.
Yes. Yes, it's very freeing. But they didn't talk to you about it. In those days, I think there was, I don't know if it's true today, there was a certain amount of shame around mental illness. You couldn't say cancer.
No, you couldn't. That's right.
Suicide.
Yeah.
I mean, Alan Alda, who's a very good friend of mine, his mother was schizophrenic, and he writes about it in his book. And he said nobody discussed it with him.
No.
It was like there was this elephant in the room, and no one told him. It's a terrible thing to leave children out in the cold like that.
Well, you know, it's not the adults' fault either. You know, they didn't have the equipment. They didn't have the tools to know how. They didn't have the words to know how to talk about it. And at least in my father's generation, and plus he was from the Midwest, he hated emotion. He hated anything that would bring up emotion. So he just, you know, he was in Broadway in Mr. Roberts. He played for 4 years. He didn't miss a performance that night.
When your mother committed suicide, he still went on.
He couldn't have handled.
The show must go on.
The show must go on. Yeah.
So what do you make of that?
I understand it now. At the time, I just felt bereft. But as I did my life review and I learned more about him and who he was and the fact that he had suffered, I think, from undiagnosed depression. It turns out most of the Fonda men had. You know, I thought he did the best he could. He didn't know what to do. So it's my job to interpret those things in a new way so that I don't live the rest of my life with guilt and anger and resentment and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, well, you know, I remember when I was in therapy years ago and I said one day, the buck stops here. It was like I had to fix what was wrong then, otherwise my kid was going to suffer
That's
for
right.
it.
There's a statute of limitations.
Somebody has to say the buck stops here.
That's
so
right.
it was, in your case, it's you.
Yeah.
You know? What about your siblings? I mean, you have only Peter? Is that your only sibling?
Peter I had a half-sister, my mother's daughter with her first husband, and Peter's my full-blooded sibling, yes.
So was he around during all this time?
Oh, yes.
He was there, too.
Oh,
so
yes.
he also had some pain involved in this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that scene from On Golden Pond was a kind of a rapprochement for the two of you, where almost a psychodrama.
You know, I had a difficult time with the scene because it was hard for me to say those words that I could never say in real life. And when the scene was over, I asked Dad if I could come over for dinner that night because I thought we can have a rapprochement, you know, and I could tell him how I had a hard time with the scene and everything. And I said, has this ever happened to you, Dad? Nope. Never? I mean, you never, nope. Bless his heart. You know, I realized you can't expect someone to change. It was 5 months before he died. You know, he he couldn't change.
Yeah.
But I could.
You could.
I could, and I could understand why he was the way he was, and I could say, my God, I'm so lucky that I had a chance to be in a movie like that with him.
It's
and
funny,
with Catherine.
he's kind of like the nope generation. You know, you could picture Jimmy Stewart saying nope, too. You know, that whole group.
Exactly.
Just those all-American skinny guys, you know?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have more with Jane Fonda in just a minute. You're so interesting and smart.
Thank you.
So let's talk about marriage, because now you have a new guy, I understand. But how many marriages did you have?
I've had 3 marriages.
Vadim?
Hayden
Hayden?
and Ted Turner.
Well, very, you know, hot numbers, all 3.
Yes.
I mean, Hayden was great for politics.
They all taught me a lot.
They all did. I mean,
Yes.
Vadim. What? By the way, I read in your other book that you had a menage a trois with Roger Vadim. See, to me, that means I have to fake it for 2 guys. I'm not interested in that.
Who said there was another guy?
Oh, there was a woman in the picture? 2 women and a guy. Oh, that sounds a little bit more possible. Only because, you know, you can...
You want to?
No. I'm not. Well, tell me about sex in the 70s. Let me hear about that.
You mean as in my age, 70s?
In your age, yeah, in your age.
Well, it's what is most interesting. First of all, it's important to know that people do get it on when they're older.
Yes.
You know, young people don't know that, and they don't like to think
Well,
about
they find
it.
it disgusting, frankly, when they think about old people doing it.
Well, they got to get over it.
Yeah.
And it's not that you have to have sex when you're older. You know, I mean, a lot of people have closed down shop down there. It's done, and they're very relieved, and a lot of women are really upset about Viagra.
I
They
know.
think it's all over with, and suddenly this thing is coming out them. And
Exactly.
Enough already.
Yeah.
But for those who do want to continue to be sexual, you've got to know what's happening to your body. It changes.
Yeah.
So how do you negotiate that? How do you make it pleasurable and successful? But basically, you know what the biggest sex organ is?
The brain.
Right.
Yeah.
The brain.
And porn.
And
Well,
what?
pornography.
Well,
That's a big
for
sex
those-
organ.
Well, if it turns your brain on,
Well-
the brain is the most important thing. And what is so great, I've experienced it personally, and I write about it in my book, Primetime, and the research shows this to be true. You can be much more turned on and intimate when you're older as a woman, because intimacy requires self-revelation. You know, you have to bring your whole self to the table. Well, I don't know about you, but I didn't want to bring my whole self to the table when I was younger. It's like, ooh, maybe they're not going to like it, so I'll maybe hold stuff back
Or maybe
and only
they'll
bring
take
what's
something.
perfect
Yeah.
to the table.
Oh, well, that was that old thing with you, where you had to be perfect, right?
And now,
Yeah.
you know, we used to say you fall in love, right? And that's the problem. You fell.
Right.
When you're older, you don't fall. You're standing on your own 2 feet as a whole, actualized, authentic person, walking into a relationship with another whole, authentic person. That's where
But what
the
if
brain...
you're with the same old person?
Well, if you're with the same old person and if it's still hot,
Yeah.
it means that they have evolved into a whole, authentic person with you.
I see.
Now, that doesn't always happen. And if you find you're in a relationship where you're having to, like, squash yourself into a thimble to be in the relationship, it's probably not the right relationship.
No, it has
you
to
know?
be. It has to be more.
But, you know, I'm fascinated by people who've been married for 50, 60 years, and I interview a bunch of them in
and
here.
still do it.
And they still do it, and they describe to me how great it is, and I'm so jealous. I'll never know that. But I can imagine, you know, being an actor, I can sort of get inside what that must feel like. You know, you have an argument, but you're lying next to someone that you've known for so long.
Yeah, that it's
and
not
you
as
know that it
important.
can be so, once they begin to touch you, it's going to blossom into beautiful things. So that's like the glue that holds them together.
You also...
So no, I'm never going to get married again, though. There's no ring.
No?
No, me and my boyfriend have matching medic alert bracelets.
You know, so, okay, you don't want to do it again. Why not?
Do what again?
Get married.
No,
There's no point.
no.
Yeah.
Do you?
No, I don't know. You never know with me. You never know with me.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. You never can say never, but I think never. No, I'm not going to get married
No.
again. I don't see why.
Yeah.
But you know.
So let's talk about the marriage.
Relationships
though, for a
are
sec.
good, though.
So Vadim was this French guy, put you in Barbarella.
You know who he'd been with before me? Well, you had. I saw Catherine Deneuve on your show.
Yes.
She was the one before me, and before her it was Bardot. I mean, it's
Bardot.
fun to be with a man who's been with Bardot and Deneuve, and you know.
Right.
I learned a lot from him.
No slouches, anybody in that group.
No.
Although Bridget, she hasn't done as well as you have, believe me, in her old years. Catherine looks great, but Bridget Bardot, forget about it.
Listen, she did well enough when she was young. She doesn't have to do anything
She did.
anymore.
She had
I
a
mean,
great 15 minutes, yeah.
15 minutes. She was a force of nature. No, but then Tom Hayden, I learned so much
Tom
from
Hayden.
him. We were together 17 years. I had a daughter
That's a
with
long
Vanessa,
one.
a son with Tom.
But Jane, in one of your books, I think it's this one, I read both of them. This book, I think you say that was a low point, though, when you got divorced from Tom.
Well,
right?
when Tom and I, after 17 years, he told me that he was in love with somebody, and I had a nervous breakdown. You know, you loved the 40s. I didn't like the 40s. I was at the end of my 40s, 50s. It was a horrible time for me. And yet it was, I write a lot about it in here because it's true for many women that the 40s can be a tough time.
They can be treacherous.
Perimenopause, you're going into menopause, you think you're going crazy, you don't know who you are anymore. And I write about how I handled that. Everyone said, stay busy, stay busy. And I said, no, I don't think so. I think I'm going to be very still. I think something really, I was in such pain, I didn't think it was possible to suffer that much. And yet from the pain came so much good things. I was broken open.
Well,
as a new person.
I think to share with that, when I got divorced, if I took responsibility for my part, what I did wrong, I was able to move on. I think that women get stuck when they play the blame game, and so do men.
Well, you always do in the beginning. I went into therapy. My therapist gave me a really good tip. Because, you know, you're especially if the man that you've been married to falls in love with somebody else, you're furious, teeth grinding, you write letters, never mail them, though. You know, you write letters and you wish them dead and so forth, because it's concrete proof that you're out of your mind.
Yeah,
Don't
but
send them.
It's great
she said, put a rubber band around your wrist, and when you feel like, snap it. And it kind of changes your neural circuits in your brain. I did a lot of snapping. A lot of snapping.
There is a lot of acting out. I mean, Dana Delaney's sister, she was on the show the other day, and she said her sister cut the bed in half with a saw. That's how she responded. Yeah.
I put all the clothes in paper in plastic bags and threw them out the window. I write about it in here in my book Prime Time, and how it's not my word, but fertile void. Suzanne Braun Levine came up with this term for it, the fertile void. You don't know who you are, you're going through a real crisis, but it's also very fertile. So you have to pay close attention. You have to stay close to the wall. You have to pay attention who you're with, the music you listen to, the movies you see, because you're very, very vulnerable. But if you can come through that to the other side, it can be the most wonderful part of life. If someone tells you that at the time, it's like you're crazy. But the fact is, it's true. And I write in the Prime Time how to go through it and come out the other side.
Your daughter, let's talk about your daughter for a minute. How much time do I have? 2 minutes, good. I read in the book that your daughter suggested that you were a chameleon.
Well,
What does she mean by
when
that?
I was approaching my 60th birthday, I decided I wanted to do what I call a life review. I write about it in Prime Time, and I thought, I'm going to make a little video. That'll give me a concrete project of myself. There's a lot of pictures and home movies and interviews, and I asked my daughter, who makes documentary films, if she would help me with it. And she said, well, Mom, why don't you just get a chameleon and let it crawl across the screen? And I realized she'd put her finger on something I was going to have to deal with. That was the rap on me. There's no there. I'm only whatever the man I'm with wants me to be. And so I spent a year doing the research, and I discovered that there is a there. That's different than what my parents said or my husband's thought or whatever. And it gave me a great deal of confidence.
It was actually a good moment for you and your daughter, because it showed that your daughter was able to say that to you, that she understood you, that she saw you, and she didn't feel nervous that she would hurt your feelings. I think you should feel like you did a great job.
She didn't care if she hurt my feelings.
Oh, I see.
She's very prickly. She was. But it's never too late, even with your prickly children. She's a brilliant woman. And we have had wonderful rapprochement. She has my 2 grandchildren. And grandchildren are the most wonderful thing. They give you a second chance, right?
That's true. You love them so much, you can't even control it.
No.
And what about your son? You have a son, too, right?
I have a son. He's
was that
married.
with Tom Hayden,
that
too?
was with Tom. His name is Troy. He's doing a new
Troy.
TV series called Boss. And then and also he's in the Playboy Club TV series.
Oh,
So
interesting.
he's very successful. He has a wonderful wife who I work with, and they haven't had children. They're rehearsing. I'm waiting for them to have a new set of grandchildren.
You know, I was talking to Gloria Steinem this week, and we talked about, you know, whether the women's movement is going backwards, you know, a little bit, because, you know, the things that we fought for in the 60s and 70s, and now the girls are doing sex videos, and they're doing higher heels, and they're very male-identified in many ways. Do you think we're going backwards, or do you feel that this is just a phase that'll go away?
Well, I think, you know, all movements go through phases, and I think the fundamentals that the women's movement brought to the lives of American women are still there, and they're still strong. But I think we have a very challenging sexist culture, and I think that, you know, we older women have to do all we can to instruct and encourage and educate the younger women
and let them know what we have to do.
Stand up for themselves.
Yeah. She said that Susan B. Anthony said, girls, we don't want our girls to be grateful. We want them to be ungrateful. Jane Fonda and I will be back in just a minute. I thought that was quite brilliant.
Yeah.
It should be.
She has a way with words,
Susan B.
Gloria.
Anthony.
Gloria. She
Gloria
remembers
too.
the good words, and she has her own good.
John. I have changed. You know that I've never been on my own before.
That was a clip of Jane Fonda in the film Coming Home, for which she won an Academy Award for Best Actress. That was a great film.
It was a wonderful film.
Yeah.
It grew out of my 3 years working with veterans and active duty servicemen.
Yeah.
And all the things that I learned, I tried to put into that movie.
John Voight, did you have an affair with him?
No,
Okay, just checking.
I was married.
You were married at the time? Yeah, because he was kind of hot in that, although it's interesting in that movie. I watched it and I thought, well, Jane's hair got curly after she had spent a night with him. It was straight before that. Now your hair got curly.
I began, it was my idea to, you know, I was straighten your hair and wear certain kinds of clothes.
Yeah.
And as my husband was in Vietnam, and as I began to become part of the peace movement and began to become real, my hair, my clothes, everything began to get real.
Yeah, but he was a paraplegic, and so, but there was great sex anyway.
Yes, the man that it was based on, Ron Kovic, after the movie came out, he said, "Thanks, my sex life has improved so much."
Now, you know, John. You know, it's funny. It's ironic because John Voight is a big conservative. You might know that.
I've heard.
Did you fight with him politically at all in the
No.
movie? No.
No.
Nothing.
No,
All right.
no.
Yeah, because sometimes
That's
you know,
happened later to him. I don't know exactly what happened.
Oh,
but,
really? He wasn't. Yeah.
No, we were very much, he was very involved with me and my then husband, Tom Hayden, in our anti-war activities.
Really?
Oh, sure,
So
absolutely.
he's become much
Angelina
more-
Jolie went to the children's camp that Tom and I ran.
Oh, yeah? Well, she has issues with him, too, I think, about his politics, although I don't know. It's in the papers. What do I know?
I don't know either.
You know, and then I have to ask you about Barbarella. I mean, when you look back and you see yourself in that movie, now, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you see that?
I'd like to do it over again. We made some mistakes. It could have been a really strong feminist movie. You know, for example, instead of being someone from this very evolved planet that comes to this backward, evil planet and teach them how to make love by taking pills and touching fingertips, no.
Yeah.
That's the way they would have done it. I would have brought them true intimacy. I would have taught them how to really make love. You know, when they put me into that machine that was supposed to kill me by orgasm,
Yeah.
instead of being kind of scared and everything, I should have gotten in and laughed. No question, I'm going to blow the fuse. I wouldn't have been afraid at all.
Well,
Yeah.
it was Vadim's movie, right? So he had his own ideas of what sex was about, I
Yeah,
guess.
and I had no ideas at that time.
Yeah.
So
It was whatever he
That was the
wanted.
end of my first act.
Yeah. And it says, I read somewhere that you said you felt alone, surrounded by lights, that being an actress at that time, your early days, you were lonely in it. Yes?
And I don't quite know where that, no.
That's a quote of yours.
I used to go onto the sets where friends of mine, or I remember I went onto the set where Marilyn Monroe was shooting Some Like It Hot, and I had not become an actress yet, and just the, you feel like a foreigner. You come onto this dark set, and somewhere in the middle there's this circle of light, and all the energy is there. Everyone's attention and energy
Yeah.
is going there, and you're on the outside. And something inside me said, I want to be there. I want to be in that circle of light. But I was very young at the time. I didn't really understand what it all meant. But I do remember seeing Marilyn leave the circle of light and walk towards me, and she had the light in her and with her.
Yeah.
She was amazing.
Did you know her well?
Not well, but she liked me. And I found her very beautiful and sad and fragile.
Isn't it amazing how her iconic status remains to this day, that people, I mean, even the youngest kids know Marilyn Monroe. The pictures of her, she and James Dean and Elvis, those are the people from the 20th century who have continued to have this effect on people.
Yes, and all of them had, besides their iconic nature, there was something fragile, something you could identify with and vulnerable. I think that has part
But, you know,
of it.
the sad thing is none of them had a third act. None of them.
No.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Audrey Hepburn is another one who died, I think, too young. She was in her 60s. And the New York Times, when she died, they had an op-ed piece that said, we would have liked to see how she taught us how to age.
Yeah, and she would have done a great job.
She would have, but you are doing that job, Jane. You're doing it.
Well, I think this book, Primetime, is doing it. This is, you know, we don't have a roadmap. We're living 34 years longer than our grandparents did and our great-grand. It's a whole second adult lifetime, and there's no roadmap how to do it. So I wanted, with Primetime, to kind of start to develop a roadmap so we'd know how to do it.
Do you find it ironic at all or distressing at all that as you reach the age where you really know what you're doing, that it's such a short time that before you'll be gone?
It's not such a short time.
Well,
It's actually much longer than we think. If we're lucky enough to, you know, to not, I mean, I could die walking out of here. I might very well die. It doesn't scare me.
It doesn't?
But no, not at all. No, because if I died right now, I would have very few regrets. You know, my fear, as I write about in the book, is coming to the end of life with a lot of regrets when it's too late to do something about it. And that's why it's important to live your life in such a way that you won't have regrets when you die, at least minimal regrets.
Absolutely.
You have to live every moment as fully as you can. You have to try to understand what you're supposed to do with your life.
Okay, you're right. We'll have even more with Jane Fonda in a minute.